For years, Burkina Faso has proudly described itself as a nation where people of different faiths could live side by side in relative harmony. Muslims, Christians, and followers of traditional beliefs shared communities, markets, schools, and public life. But today, a new law on religious freedom has ignited one of the most intense national debates in recent memory. Supporters call it a long-overdue reform that closes dangerous legal loopholes. Critics warn that it could give the government greater control over religious activities. So what is really happening? At the center of this debate stands Captain Ibrahim Traore, the leader who has built much of his reputation on restoring order, defending national sovereignty, and confronting the security crisis that has shaken Burkina Faso for more than a decade. His government insists that the new law is not directed against any religion. Instead, officials argue that it is designed to prevent extremists from exploiting faith to spread division, recruit followers, and undermine national stability. The timing of this reform is no accident. Burkina Faso continues to face serious security challenges, including terrorist violence, community tensions, and the displacement of millions of citizens. In such an environment, the question facing the country is no longer simply about religious freedom. It is about how to protect freedom while also protecting society itself. Is this law a necessary step toward a safer future? Or does it risk creating new controversies in a nation already under pressure? In this video, we will examine the roots of the reform, the legal gaps it seeks to address, the reactions it has provoked, and what it could mean for the future of Burkina Faso. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you do not miss our in-depth coverage of Africa's most important developments. Since 2015, Burkina Faso has faced a security crisis unlike anything in its modern history. What began as a series of isolated attacks gradually evolved into a nationwide challenge that affected nearly every aspect of society. Villages were abandoned, schools were forced to close, economic activity slowed, and entire communities found themselves living under constant uncertainty. For many citizens, daily life became less about planning for the future and more about staying safe through the next week or even the next day. The human cost has been enormous. Millions of people have been displaced from their homes, creating one of the largest internal displacement crises in Africa. Families who once lived peacefully on their ancestral land suddenly found themselves dependent on humanitarian assistance. Children lost access to education. Farmers lost access to their fields, and local economies struggled to survive under growing pressure. As the crisis deepened, government officials and security analysts began asking a difficult question. How had extremist movements been able to establish influence in so many areas? While poverty, weak infrastructure, and regional instability were all contributing factors, many observers pointed to another issue that received less attention: the exploitation of religious platforms by individuals promoting radical ideas. It is important to understand that the overwhelming majority of religious leaders in Burkina Faso have consistently rejected violence and encouraged peaceful coexistence. However, authorities argue that a small number of actors used religious language and community influence to spread extremist narratives, recruit vulnerable individuals, and weaken social cohesion. In regions where state institutions were already struggling, such messages sometimes found fertile ground. For supporters of the new religious freedom law, this background explains why reform became necessary. They argue that Burkina Faso is not debating religious freedom in a vacuum. The country is responding to a real security emergency that has already changed millions of lives. From this perspective, the challenge is not whether faith should be protected. The challenge is ensuring that faith can never again be exploited as a tool for violence, division, or instability. For many years, Burkina Faso relied on constitutional guarantees of religious freedom and a relatively simple framework for regulating religious organizations. In principle, this approach reflected the country's commitment to tolerance and peaceful coexistence. Citizens were free to practice their faith, establish places of worship, and participate in religious life without significant government interference. For a long time, this model appeared sufficient. However, the security challenges that emerged over the past decade exposed weaknesses that had received little attention during more stable periods. While freedom of belief remained protected, authorities found themselves confronting situations that existing laws were not designed to address. Questions began to arise about who could preach in public, how foreign religious speakers should be regulated, and what measures could be taken when religious messages crossed the line into incitement or extremism. Supporters of reform argue that this legal gap created opportunities for abuse. In their view, the problem was never religion itself. Rather, it was the absence of clear rules governing activities that could affect public order and national security. When authorities encountered individuals accused of promoting division or radicalization, existing legal tools were often limited or unclear. Another issue involved the use of public spaces. Over time, concerns grew regarding the establishment of religious activities in areas not originally intended for worship. Government officials argued that the lack of precise regulations created confusion about the boundaries between personal religious practice and the management of shared public spaces. This debate ultimately led to a broader question: can a nation preserve religious freedom while also ensuring accountability, transparency, and public safety? The government of Burkina Faso believes the answer is yes, but only if clear legal standards exist. From this perspective, the new law is not presented as a restriction on faith. It is presented as an effort to define responsibilities, close, long-standing loopholes, and provide authorities with a clearer framework for addressing challenges that did not exist, or were far less visible when the previous system was established. So what exactly does Burkina Faso's new religious freedom laws do? This question sits at the heart of the national debate. Supporters describe the legislation as a necessary modernization of outdated regulations, while critics worry about its potential impact on civil liberties. To understand the controversy, it is important to separate political rhetoric from the actual objectives presented by the government. According to officials, the law is built around a simple principle: religious freedom remains protected, but activities carried out in the name of religion must respect public order and national security. The government argues that these two goals are not contradictory. In fact, it insists that one cannot survive without the other in a country facing persistent extremist threats. One major area of focus is the regulation of religious activities that may have broader social consequences. Authorities want clearer oversight of individuals who enter the country to preach, teach, or influence religious communities. Supporters argue that this is intended to prevent external actors from spreading messages that encourage intolerance, radicalization, or violence. Another important provision concerns public spaces. The government has indicated that citizens remain free to pray and practice their faith. However, officials also argue that public areas should not automatically become permanent religious sites without authorization. In their view, maintaining neutral public spaces is essential in a secular state where multiple religions coexist. The law also addresses the protection of vulnerable groups, including children and individuals who may be exposed to exploitation in the name of religion. Government representatives have repeatedly stated that faith should never be used as a justification for manipulation, coercion, recruitment, or abuse. Ultimately, Supporters of the reform insist that the legislation targets harmful behavior rather than religious belief itself. Whether one agrees with that argument or not, the central question remains clear: is Burkina Faso creating safeguards against extremism, or is it redefining the boundaries of religious freedom? The answer to that question will likely determine how this law is judged in the years ahead. As debate over the law intensified, one incident became a symbol of the broader national controversy. The case involved Imam Mohammed Ishaq Kindo, a well-known religious figure whose criticism of the proposed legislation attracted significant public attention. His remarks, and the government's response, quickly transformed a legal discussion into a nationwide conversation about freedom, authority, and security. Supporters of Imam Kindo argued that religious leaders should have the right to express concerns about laws that affect their communities. They viewed public debate as a normal part of civic life, and believed that questioning government policies should not automatically be interpreted as a threat to national stability. For many observers, the controversy highlighted fears that stronger regulation could eventually discourage open discussion. On the other hand, supporters of the government emphasized the unique circumstances facing Burkina Faso. They argued that the country remains engaged in a difficult struggle against extremist violence, and that authorities cannot ignore statements or activities they believe could contribute to instability. In their view, protecting national security sometimes requires difficult decisions that may not be necessary under normal conditions. The controversy soon attracted attention beyond Burkina Faso. Some Western commentators and human rights advocates expressed concern that the new law could expand state authority over religious affairs. Critics warned that governments often justify greater control by citing security concerns, creating the risk that legitimate religious expression may eventually face restrictions. These concerns deserve consideration. However, supporters of the reform respond with a simple argument. Burkina Faso is not operating under the conditions enjoyed by many stable Western democracies. It is confronting terrorism, mass displacement, and ongoing security threats. They argue that judging the country's actions without acknowledging this reality risks ignoring the challenges that pushed the government toward reform in the first place. The result is a debate that continues to divide opinion both inside and outside the country. Supporters of Burkina Faso's new religious freedom law often respond to Western criticism by pointing to a simple reality. Many countries that now question the reform have themselves adopted extraordinary security measures when faced with serious terrorist threats. Following major attacks, governments in Europe and North America expanded surveillance powers, strengthened oversight of organizations suspected of extremism, and introduced new legal tools designed to prevent radicalization before violence could occur. From this perspective, Burkina Faso is not inventing a new principle. It is applying a principle that many nations have embraced during periods of crisis. The difference is that Burkina Faso continues to confront a security threat that remains active and immediate. Supporters argue that expecting the country to maintain a completely hands-off approach to potentially dangerous activities would be unrealistic under current circumstances. This argument aligns closely with the broader political philosophy associated with Captain Ibrahim Traore. Since taking power, Traore has repeatedly emphasized the need for a stronger state capable of defending national sovereignty, restoring security, and rebuilding public confidence. In his view, institutions cannot remain passive when legal loopholes are exploited by individuals seeking to undermine national unity. For Traore's supporters, the religious freedom law is part of a wider effort to re-establish state authority in areas where control has weakened over time. They see it as a preventive measure, rather than a punitive one. The goal, they argue, is to stop dangerous trends before they evolve into larger threats. Yet the future of the law will depend on implementation. If authorities apply it fairly and transparently, supporters believe it could strengthen social cohesion and reduce opportunities for extremist influence. If enforcement appears selective or politically motivated, critics will likely gain momentum. Ultimately, the law represents more than a debate about religion. It has become a test of Ibrahim Traore's vision for Burkina Faso and his promise to build a nation that is both secure and united. Burkina Faso's new religious freedom law has become far more than a legal reform. It has evolved into a national conversation about security, responsibility, sovereignty, and the future direction of the country. Supporters believe the law closes long-standing loopholes that allowed extremist actors to exploit religion for purposes far removed from faith. Critics remain concerned about the potential consequences for civil liberties and the balance of power between the state and religious communities. What cannot be denied is that Burkina Faso faces challenges unlike those confronting many nations at peace. Years of terrorist violence, social disruption, and mass displacement have forced leaders to confront difficult questions. How much freedom can a society preserve without effective safeguards? And how much regulation can a government impose without undermining the freedoms it seeks to protect? The answers will depend not only on the text of the law, but also on how it is applied in practice. If implemented with fairness, transparency, and respect for legitimate religious expression, supporters believe it could strengthen national unity and resilience. If mistakes are made, the controversy surrounding the law may continue for years to come. As Burkina Faso moves forward, many across the continent will be watching closely. The debate touches on themes linked to Pan-African aspirations, the future of the African Union, and the broader vision of Pan-Africanism. Whether one supports or opposes the reform, it is clear that Captain Ibrahim Traore and Ibrahim Traore have placed Burkina Faso at the center of an important discussion about governance in a changing Africa new era. Share your thoughts in the comments, and do not forget to subscribe for more analysis of the issues shaping Africa today. Have you noticed something unusual about the case of Imam Mohammed Isaac Kindo? Across Burkina Faso, discussions continue to grow around the influential Sunni preacher. Yet, one question keeps attracting attention. If the authorities intended to impose a severe punishment, why has there been no final public announcement explaining exactly what will happen next? This question has encouraged many observers to look beyond the headlines. Some believe the government is sending a message about national unity. Others believe the situation may eventually lead to a more conciliatory outcome. In this video, we will examine the facts surrounding the case, the reactions it has generated, and the signs that have led some people to wonder whether Imam Kindo could regain his freedom in the future. We will also explore the role of President Ibrahim Traore, the importance of social cohesion, and why this issue has become a national conversation rather than simply a legal matter. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel and join our growing community for more analysis on Burkina Faso and the major developments shaping Africa today. To understand the current debate, we must first look at what happened. Imam Mohammed Isaac Kindo is one of the best-known Sunni religious figures in Burkina Faso. His sermons have reached large audiences, giving him significant influence within parts of the Muslim community. The controversy began after a series of statements connected to religious coexistence and national unity. Critics argued that some of his remarks could deepen divisions at a time when Burkina Faso faces serious security challenges. Supporters, however, viewed his comments as expressions of religious conviction. As public debate intensified, the authorities intervened, leading to his detention. What followed was not merely a discussion about one preacher. The case quickly evolved into a broader national debate involving religion, security, social harmony, and the future stability of Burkina Faso. One of the most interesting aspects of the Imam Kindo case is not what has happened, but what has not happened. Since the detention of the influential preacher, many people expected a rapid escalation. Some anticipated official accusations, public condemnations, or a highly visible legal process. Yet, the situation has unfolded differently. Up to now, there has been no widely publicized final decision explaining the long-term outcome of the case. This absence of a clear conclusion has encouraged speculation across Burkina Faso and beyond. For some observers, this may suggest that the authorities are approaching the matter with caution. Rather than turning the case into a public confrontation, the government appears focused on maintaining stability while evaluating the broader implications of the controversy. Another detail attracting attention is the lack of an aggressive campaign targeting Imam Kindo personally. In many politically sensitive cases around the world, governments often use public messaging to justify harsh measures. In this situation, however, the emphasis appears to remain on preserving social order and preventing tensions from escalating. This distinction is important. If the primary objective were punishment alone, the public narrative might look very different. Instead, many analysts believe the authorities may be attempting to send a warning about the consequences of statements that could be interpreted as undermining national cohesion. Burkina Faso continues to face serious security threats from extremist violence. In such an environment, leaders often view social unity as a strategic necessity rather than a political slogan. From this perspective, the government's actions could be interpreted as preventive rather than purely punitive. Whether one agrees with that approach or not, it helps explain why the situation remains under close observation. As a result, some citizens have begun asking a question that seemed unlikely at the beginning of the controversy. Could this case ultimately end through dialogue and reconciliation rather than a prolonged confrontation? One of the strongest reasons some observers believe the situation could eventually move toward a peaceful resolution is the reaction of Burkina Faso's Muslim organizations. In many countries, the detention of a well-known religious leader can trigger demonstrations, confrontational statements, and a rapid escalation of tensions. Yet, the response following Imam Kindo's detention has been notably different. Rather than encouraging confrontation, major Muslim organizations have repeatedly called for calm, patience, and respect for public institutions. Their message has focused on avoiding rumors, preserving social harmony, and allowing official processes to continue. This response is significant because it suggests that important channels of communication may still exist between religious leaders and state authorities. For many analysts, this is one of the most overlooked aspects of the entire story. If religious organizations believed that all possibilities for dialogue had disappeared, their public position might be much more aggressive. Instead, they have consistently emphasized restraint and responsibility. The influence of Imam Kindo within the Muslim community makes this approach even more important. He is not an unknown figure. His sermons have reached large audiences, and many people continue to follow his teachings closely. Because of that influence, community leaders understand that every public statement can affect national stability. The decision to promote calm rather than confrontation may reflect a shared understanding that Burkina Faso faces challenges far greater than any single controversy. The country continues to battle insecurity, economic pressures, and the threat of extremist violence. For this reason, many observers believe both religious organizations and government officials have strong incentives to avoid a prolonged conflict. While no one can predict the final outcome, the continued emphasis on dialogue has encouraged some citizens to believe that negotiations and mutual understanding may still play an important role in determining what happens next. To fully understand the possibility of Imam Kindo's future release, it is necessary to examine the perspective of President Ibrahim Traore and the priorities that have shaped his leadership. Since taking power, Traore has consistently presented national unity as one of the foundations of Burkina Faso's survival. His speeches frequently emphasize sovereignty, security, resilience, and the need for citizens to stand together against threats facing the country. This approach is closely linked to the reality Burkina Faso faces today. For years, armed extremist groups have attempted to exploit local grievances, social frustrations, and community divisions. Their objective is not only to challenge state authority, but also to weaken the bonds that hold society together. Because of this reality, government officials often view potentially divisive messages through a security lens rather than simply a religious or political one. Many supporters of the current administration argue that the state has become particularly sensitive to any public discourse that could increase tensions between communities. Whether those concerns are justified or not, they help explain why authorities may react quickly when they believe national cohesion could be affected. At the same time, there is an important distinction that deserves attention. For many observers, the actions taken against Imam Kindo should not automatically be interpreted as opposition to Islam itself. Burkina Faso is home to a large Muslim population, and religious institutions remain an important part of national life. Instead, supporters of the government argue that the objective is to prevent messages that could deepen social divisions during a period of exceptional national difficulty. Understanding this distinction is essential because it provides insight into how the authorities may be evaluating the case and what factors could influence future decisions regarding Imam Kindo. Understanding President Ibrahim Traore's priorities helps explain why many observers continue to believe that a future release for Imam Kindo remains possible. From the government's perspective, several objectives must be achieved simultaneously. Authorities want to preserve public order, reinforce the authority of state institutions, and prevent messages that could be interpreted as encouraging division. At the same time, they must also maintain constructive relations with religious communities that play an essential role in national life. This delicate balance is one reason why the case continues to attract attention. Imam Kindo is not only a religious leader, he is also a respected public figure with significant influence among many citizens. Decisions involving individuals of this stature often require careful consideration because they can affect social stability far beyond the immediate legal questions. For this reason, some analysts believe that if authorities conclude their objectives have been achieved, a more flexible outcome could become possible. Such an outcome might allow the government to reaffirm its position on national unity while avoiding a prolonged dispute with influential religious circles. Of course, no one outside official institutions can predict the final decision. Any suggestion that Imam Kindo will certainly be released would go beyond the available evidence. However, the combination of restrained public messaging, continued calls for calm from religious organizations, and the absence of a highly confrontational approach has encouraged speculation that dialogue may still play a role in the resolution of the case. Whether that speculation proves correct remains to be seen. Yet, for many citizens, these developments are among the strongest reasons for believing that the story of Imam Kindo may not have reached its final chapter. The case of Imam Kindo has also sparked a broader debate that extends far beyond Burkina Faso. It touches on a question that many African nations continue to face. How should governments balance freedom of expression, religious influence, and national security during periods of instability? Some international observers and human rights advocates may view the detention of a religious leader with concern. From their perspective, any action involving a public figure known for religious preaching raises important questions about freedom of speech and religious liberty. These concerns are not unique to Burkina Faso. Similar debates have emerged in many countries whenever governments intervene in matters involving influential religious voices. However, supporters of Burkina Faso's current leadership often present a different argument. They point to the country's ongoing struggle against extremist violence and the serious security threats that continue to affect communities across the nation. In their view, leaders cannot evaluate controversial statements solely through the lens of individual freedoms. They must also consider the potential impact on public stability and national cohesion. This difference in perspective helps explain why reactions to the case vary so widely. What some international critics may interpret as a restriction of liberty, others may see as a preventive measure designed to protect society during a period of extraordinary challenges. The debate surrounding Imam Kindo therefore reflects a larger conversation taking place across Africa. It is a conversation about sovereignty, security, social harmony, and the difficult choices governments sometimes face when trying to protect both freedom and stability at the same time. As the debate surrounding Imam Mohammed Isaac Kindo continues, one reality remains clear. This story is no longer only about a single religious leader. It has become a reflection of the challenges facing Burkina Faso as it seeks to protect national unity while respecting the important role of faith in society. At this stage, there is no confirmed evidence proving that Imam Kindo will soon be released. Any prediction presented as certainty would be irresponsible. However, there are several developments that continue to attract attention. The absence of a final public resolution, the measured response from religious organizations, and the continued emphasis on calm and dialogue have all contributed to speculation that a less confrontational outcome may still be possible. At the same time, the government of Ibrahim Traore faces a difficult responsibility. It must preserve social cohesion, confront security threats, and maintain public confidence while navigating sensitive religious issues that affect millions of citizens. The outcome of this case may ultimately reveal how Burkina Faso intends to balance these competing priorities in the years ahead. Whatever happens next, the discussion has already provided an important lesson for the continent. African nations continue searching for ways to strengthen unity without sacrificing stability, and to protect security without creating deeper divisions. This is why the Imam Kindo case is being watched far beyond Burkina Faso. If you have an opinion on how governments should respond in situations like this, share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more analysis on Pan-African issues, Burkina Faso, Africa New Developments, Captain Ibrahim Traore, the African Union, Pan-Africanism, and the future role of Ibrahim Traore in shaping the continent, be sure to subscribe and join us in the next discussion. A shocking decision is sending waves across Burkina Faso and far beyond its borders. In a country that has spent years fighting terrorism, political instability, and foreign interference, the latest developments have sparked intense debate among supporters and critics alike. Reports indicate that around 80 protesters arrested following demonstrations linked to the Imam Kindo affair have reportedly been placed into military training programs. For many observers, this is not just another security measure. It is being interpreted as one of the strongest signals Captain Ibrahim Traore has sent since taking power. The controversy began after the arrest of Imam Kindo, a religious figure whose comments regarding government policies triggered widespread discussion throughout Burkina Faso. What started as a disagreement over religious and political issues quickly evolved into a national debate about security, freedom, responsibility, and the future direction of the country. Supporters of the government argue that Burkina Faso is fighting for its survival and cannot afford actions that may create division during a period of ongoing conflict. Critics, however, question whether such measures risk creating even more tension. As the story continues to unfold, one question remains at the center of the discussion. Is this a necessary defense of national unity, or the beginning of a new confrontation within Burkinabe society? Before we examine the answers, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss our in-depth analysis of Burkina Faso, Captain Ibrahim Traore, and the major events shaping the future of Africa. To understand the current crisis, we must first understand how it began. Imam Kindo became the center of national attention after publicly criticizing aspects of a government proposal concerning the regulation of religious activities and facilities. His statements rapidly spread through social media, radio discussions, and community networks across the country. What may have appeared at first to be a disagreement over policy soon became something much larger. The arrest of Imam Kindo quickly transformed a local controversy into a national story. According to reports circulating across Burkina Faso, supporters of the religious leader gathered to demand his release after authorities detained him for statements that officials considered dangerous and potentially destabilizing. What happened next surprised many people both inside and outside the country. Demonstrations began appearing in several areas, with participants claiming they were defending religious freedom and opposing what they viewed as government overreach. Supporters argued that Imam Kindo was being punished for expressing his views. Meanwhile, government supporters saw the situation very differently. They believed that certain statements made by the imam risked increasing social tensions at a time when the nation was already facing enormous security challenges. As the protests grew, security forces moved to restore order. Several demonstrators were detained, and reports soon emerged that approximately 80 individuals had been selected for military-style training programs. Images and videos allegedly showing groups of young men undergoing training quickly spread across social media platforms, generating intense reactions. For many observers, this was not simply a punishment. It appeared to be a powerful message from the state. The message seemed clear. If citizens are willing to mobilize, confront authorities, and participate in activities that could threaten stability, then they should also be willing to contribute directly to the defense of the nation. Supporters of Captain Ibrahim Traore praised the move as innovative and symbolic. They argued that many critics of government security policies have never experienced the harsh realities faced by soldiers and volunteers fighting terrorism in remote regions of the country. According to this view, military training could help participants better understand the sacrifices being made every day to protect Burkina Faso. Whether one agrees or disagrees with the decision, there is little doubt that it has become one of the most talked-about actions of Traore's administration and has dramatically intensified the national conversation about security, responsibility, and citizenship. To understand why Ibrahim Traore's government reacted so forcefully, it is necessary to look beyond the protests themselves and examine the environment in which Burkina Faso currently exists. Unlike countries enjoying long periods of peace and stability, Burkina Faso remains engaged in a difficult struggle against armed extremist groups that have threatened communities for years. Since the middle of the last decade, attacks by terrorist organizations have affected villages, transportation routes, public institutions, and entire regions. Thousands of lives have been lost, while millions of citizens have experienced displacement, insecurity, and economic hardship. For many families, the threat is not something they see on television. It is something they have experienced personally. This reality has shaped the leadership philosophy of Captain Ibrahim Traore. Unlike traditional politicians who often focus on public approval and political compromise, Traore frequently presents himself as a wartime leader whose primary responsibility is ensuring the survival of the nation. His speeches consistently emphasize discipline, sacrifice, unity, and national sovereignty. From this perspective, any event capable of creating instability is viewed through a security lens. A protest is not simply a protest. A controversy is not simply a controversy. Government officials may see such events as potential openings that hostile groups could exploit to weaken national cohesion. Supporters of Traore argue that this mindset explains why his administration responds quickly and firmly to situations that might appear less significant to outside observers. They believe the country cannot afford internal divisions while soldiers, volunteers, and security forces continue fighting on multiple fronts. For these supporters, the issue extends far beyond Imam Kindo or the protesters. The real concern is preserving national unity during one of the most challenging periods in Burkina Faso's modern history. In their view, allowing tensions to escalate unchecked could create opportunities for enemies of the state to exploit confusion and weaken the collective effort against terrorism. However, understanding Traore's approach requires examining another issue that sits at the center of this controversy. The debate is not only about security, it is also about religion, national identity, and the challenge of preventing extremism while protecting legitimate religious freedom. Burkina Faso is a deeply diverse nation where different religious communities have lived together for generations. Millions of citizens practice their faith peacefully and contribute positively to society. For this reason, government supporters often emphasize that the current dispute should not be interpreted as a conflict between the state and religion itself. Instead, they argue that the real concern involves the possibility of religious influence being used to fuel political confrontation or social instability. Across the wider Sahel region, extremist organizations have frequently attempted to recruit supporters by manipulating religious narratives and presenting themselves as defenders of faith. In many cases, these groups have exploited frustration, poverty, and insecurity to attract followers. Because of this history, officials in Burkina Faso tend to react strongly whenever they believe religious rhetoric could contribute to division. Supporters of the government insist that there is an important distinction between practicing religion and using religion as a tool for political mobilization during a national security crisis. This perspective also helps explain why many supporters rejected claims that the government was targeting Islam. They point to official statements indicating that citizens remain free to worship and practice their faith. According to this argument, the objective is not to restrict belief, but to ensure that no individual or group can place sectarian interests above national unity. For Traore and many of his supporters, the principle is simple. Every religion deserves respect, but the survival of the nation must remain the highest priority. In a country facing ongoing security threats, they believe that any ideology, movement, or public figure capable of deepening divisions must be approached with caution, regardless of religious affiliation. The controversy surrounding Imam Kindo and the reported military training of protesters has also triggered a broader international debate. Outside Burkina Faso, several media organizations, human rights groups, and political commentators have expressed concern about the direction of the country's leadership under Captain Ibrahim Traore. Critics argue that strong measures against protesters could discourage political dissent and limit public debate. Some observers have questioned whether the arrest of a religious figure and the detention of demonstrators reflect a growing concentration of power within the state. These concerns have been widely discussed across international media platforms and among organizations that focus on civil liberties. Yet, inside Burkina Faso and across parts of Africa, many people see the situation through a very different lens. Supporters of Traore argue that foreign observers often evaluate Burkina Faso using standards developed in stable societies that are not facing the same level of security threats. They believe that outsiders frequently underestimate the daily realities of communities living under the constant threat of terrorist violence. This difference in perspective has created two competing narratives. One narrative focuses on civil liberties and political freedoms. The other focuses on national survival, security, and sovereignty. Both sides claim to be defending important principles, which is why the debate has become so intense. Beyond the immediate controversy, many citizens are concerned about something even larger. They fear that internal divisions could weaken the country at a critical moment. Years of conflict have left deep scars across Burkina Faso, and many people worry that social tensions could be exploited by extremist groups or outside actors seeking to create instability. For these citizens, the greatest danger is not disagreement itself. The greatest danger is allowing disagreement to evolve into lasting division. In their view, maintaining national cohesion remains essential if Burkina Faso hopes to secure peace, rebuild communities, and protect future generations from the violence that has already caused so much suffering. What many people outside Burkina Faso struggle to understand is the emotional weight carried by ordinary citizens after years of insecurity. For countless families, discussions about politics are not abstract debates. They are directly connected to memories of attacks, displacement, lost livelihoods, and loved ones who never returned home. This reality helps explain why a significant portion of the population places such a high value on stability. While opinions differ regarding the government's methods, many citizens share the same fear. They fear a return to chaos. They fear seeing communities divided at a time when unity is desperately needed. The controversy surrounding Imam Kindo has therefore become more than a dispute involving one religious figure. It has become a symbol of a larger national conversation about identity, security, responsibility, and the future of Burkina Faso. Supporters of the government believe that maintaining order today may prevent greater suffering tomorrow. Critics continue to argue for stronger protections of individual freedoms. Between these positions stands a population that wants peace, security, and an opportunity to rebuild its future. Regardless of where one stands in this debate, one fact remains clear. The decisions being made today will shape Burkina Faso for years to come. The challenge facing the nation is finding a path that preserves both unity and justice, while ensuring that future generations inherit a country that is stronger, safer, and more resilient than before. The events surrounding Imam Kindo, the demonstrations that followed, and the reported military training of approximately 80 protesters have become far more than a single political controversy. They now represent a defining moment in the national conversation about security, religion, sovereignty, and the future direction of Burkina Faso. For supporters of Captain Ibrahim Traore, the message coming from the government is unmistakable. Burkina Faso is engaged in a struggle that goes beyond politics. It is a fight for stability, territorial integrity, and national survival. From this perspective, any action capable of increasing division during a period of conflict must be addressed firmly and decisively. Those who support the government's response argue that extraordinary times require extraordinary measures, and that national unity must remain the highest priority. Others continue to raise concerns about civil liberties, freedom of expression, and the importance of preserving open public debate. These concerns are part of an important discussion that will likely continue both inside Burkina Faso and throughout the international community. The challenge for any nation facing insecurity is finding the balance between protecting freedom and protecting stability. Yet one lesson stands above all others. No country can move forward if its people become divided against one another, whether the issue involves politics, religion, ethnicity, or ideology. Lasting progress depends upon a shared commitment to the nation itself. This is why many observers believe the most important battle facing Burkina Faso today is not only against terrorism, it is also against division, mistrust, and manipulation. The broader lesson extends beyond Burkina Faso. Across Africa, governments, communities, and religious leaders face similar questions about how to preserve unity while respecting diversity. The future of the continent may depend on finding answers that strengthen both national identity and social harmony. As this story continues to develop, one thing remains certain. The decisions being made today will influence not only Burkina Faso, but also the wider conversation about sovereignty, security, and leadership across Africa, whether one agrees or disagrees with the methods being used. The debate has become impossible to ignore. What do you think about this situation? Was the government's response justified? Or should a different path have been taken? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy thoughtful discussions about Pan-African issues, Burkina Faso, Captain Ibrahim Traore, the African Union, Pan-Africanism, and the growing influence of Ibrahim Traore across the continent, be sure to subscribe to the channel and join us for future analysis. Why would a government take action against a religious leader before a single shot is fired? Why is the Imam Kindo case generating such intense debate across Burkina Faso and beyond? For some observers, it appears to be a question of religious freedom. For others, it is a matter of national security. The controversy comes at a time when Burkina Faso continues to face serious terrorist threats. Across the Sahel, governments have spent years fighting armed groups that have destabilized communities, displaced millions of people, and challenged state authority. Yet many security experts argue that these crises did not begin with weapons. They began with ideas, narratives, and networks that slowly gained influence long before violence appeared. This is why the Imam Kindo affair has attracted so much attention. Supporters and critics are asking the same question from different perspectives. Is Burkina Faso acting too early, or is it acting before it is too late? In this video, we will examine the controversy surrounding Imam Kindo, the lessons learned from Mali and Nigeria, and why President Ibrahim Traore believes that preventing radicalization may be just as important as defeating terrorists on the battlefield. If you enjoy in-depth analysis of Africa's most important political and security issues, be sure to follow the channel for more content. To understand this controversy, we must first recognize that it is about more than one individual. The debate reflects a broader struggle between protecting religious freedoms and safeguarding national unity. According to supporters of the government's position, certain messages can contribute to division inside society if they encourage people to reject coexistence or challenge the foundations of national cohesion. From this perspective, authorities have a responsibility to intervene before tensions escalate. Critics see the matter differently. They worry that actions against religious figures may create concerns about freedom of expression and freedom of belief. They argue that governments must be careful not to confuse controversial opinions with genuine security threats. What makes Burkina Faso's situation unique is the security environment in which this debate is taking place. The country remains engaged in a difficult fight against extremist groups. For many officials, the question is not only about today's circumstances, but about preventing future crises. Their concern is that movements capable of creating instability often begin quietly, years before they become visible to the wider public. Before the terrorist crisis exploded in 2012, Mali was often presented as one of the more stable countries in West Africa. To many outside observers, the sudden collapse of security appeared shocking and unexpected. However, security analysts later concluded that the warning signs had existed for many years before armed groups seized territory and challenged state authority. One of the most important lessons from Mali is that extremist movements rarely emerge overnight. Long before violence reached the headlines, networks of influence were gradually expanding within communities, Religious circles, local associations, informal education systems, and influential preachers helped shape ideas that attracted followers over time. Most of these activities appeared peaceful on the surface, making it difficult for authorities to recognize the potential danger. The case of Amadou Kofa is frequently cited when discussing this transformation. Before becoming associated with armed jihadist movements, he was known primarily as a preacher. His messages focused on issues that resonated deeply with ordinary people, including corruption, injustice, poverty, and the failures of political elites. Because these concerns were real, many listeners viewed his speeches as legitimate criticism rather than part of a broader ideological project. As support networks expanded, the state continued to underestimate the significance of what was happening. Attention remained focused on immediate political and economic problems, while deeper ideological changes were taking place within parts of society. By the time armed groups became powerful enough to launch major operations, the foundations had already been established. The consequences were devastating. Large areas of territory fell outside effective government control. Communities were displaced, economic activity suffered, and insecurity spread beyond Mali's borders into neighboring countries. For many officials in Burkina Faso today, Mali represents a warning that waiting for violence before taking action can be a costly mistake. Their concern is that once extremist networks become deeply rooted, reversing the process becomes far more difficult than preventing it in the first place. If Mali provided a warning, Nigeria offered an even more dramatic example of how extremist movements can evolve over time. The rise of Boko Haram demonstrated that some of the most dangerous insurgencies in Africa began not with military operations, but with ideas that slowly gained influence inside communities. At the center of this story was Mohammed Yusuf. Before Boko Haram became known for violence, Yusuf was recognized primarily as a religious preacher. He attracted followers through sermons, educational activities, and community engagement. His message appealed particularly to young people who felt frustrated by poverty, unemployment, corruption, and limited opportunities. As his influence grew, so did the movement's ability to build networks. New followers joined not because they were seeking violence, but because they believed they had found answers to social and economic problems. This gradual expansion allowed the organization to strengthen its presence while remaining largely outside the focus of national security efforts. For years, many observers underestimated the significance of what was happening. The movement appeared to be another religious organization operating within society, yet beneath the surface, a more radical ideology was taking shape. Loyalty to the movement increased, alternative narratives gained support, and a growing number of followers became disconnected from mainstream institutions. The turning point came in 2009. By then, Boko Haram had already established a substantial social base. When confrontation with the state intensified, the movement was able to transition into armed insurgency. What followed became one of the deadliest security crises in modern African history. Thousands of lives were lost. Entire communities were uprooted. Economic development suffered across large regions of Nigeria and neighboring countries. The conflict also created long-term humanitarian challenges that continue to affect millions of people. For leaders in Burkina Faso, the Nigerian experience reinforces a critical lesson. By the time extremist violence becomes visible, the conditions that make it possible may have been developing for many years. Preventing radicalization early is often far easier than defeating a fully established insurgency later. The debate surrounding Imam Kindo ultimately raises a much larger question. How do extremist movements develop? And why do security experts often warn that the most dangerous phase occurs long before violence begins. Many specialists describe radicalization as a gradual process rather than a sudden event. While every case is different, researchers frequently identify a pattern that unfolds in several stages. Understanding this pattern helps explain why some governments choose to intervene before an armed threat becomes visible. The first stage is ideological messaging. During this phase, individuals or groups promote narratives designed to reshape how people view society, authority, identity, and conflict. These messages are often presented as solutions to real grievances, making them attractive to audiences facing economic hardship, corruption, or social frustration. The second stage involves community building. Supporters create networks, associations, and social circles that strengthen group identity. Over time, members begin to rely more heavily on these networks for information, guidance, and social support. The third stage is recruitment. Influential figures identify individuals who are particularly receptive to the message. Young people, especially those who feel marginalized or excluded, often become key targets. The goal is to transform passive supporters into committed followers. The fourth stage occurs when the movement increasingly challenges existing institutions. Government legitimacy is questioned. Alternative systems are promoted, and loyalty to the group becomes more important than loyalty to the state. At this point, polarization within society often becomes more visible. The fifth and final stage is organized violence. By the time weapons appear, the ideological foundations have usually been established. Recruitment networks already exist. Support structures are in place, and members have accepted narratives that justify confrontation. This model helps explain why many security officials insist that terrorism begins with ideas rather than bullets. Violence may attract headlines, but it is often only the final chapter of a much longer process. For countries facing extremist threats, the challenge is recognizing the early warning signs before the cycle reaches its most destructive stage. For President Ibrahim Traore, the controversy surrounding Imam Kindo cannot be separated from the broader security challenges facing Burkina Faso. The government is not simply fighting armed groups on remote battlefields, it is also confronting what many officials describe as a battle for ideas, national unity, and social stability. Since taking power in 2022, Traore has consistently framed security as a matter of national survival. His administration has focused on restoring territorial control, strengthening national sovereignty, and mobilizing citizens to participate in the defense of the country. Within this framework, preventing extremist influence is viewed as an essential part of protecting the state. Supporters of the government's approach argue that waiting for violence to emerge would repeat mistakes made elsewhere in the region. They point to Mali and Nigeria as examples of countries where extremist movements gained influence over many years before transforming into major security threats. From this perspective, early intervention is not a sign of repression, but a strategy of prevention. Another important factor is national cohesion. Burkina Faso is a diverse country composed of multiple ethnic, religious, and cultural communities. At a time when terrorist organizations actively seek to exploit divisions, many officials believe that preserving social harmony is a critical security objective. Messages perceived as encouraging separation or hostility between groups are therefore treated with particular concern. Traore has also emphasized the importance of African solutions to African challenges. Rather than relying exclusively on external models, his government promotes the idea that Burkina Faso must develop its own approach to protecting its people and institutions. This philosophy has become a central part of his political identity and explains why security decisions are often presented as expressions of national sovereignty. Whether one agrees with these policies or not, The logic behind them is clear. The government believes that extremist threats should be addressed at every stage of development, including the ideological stage. In the eyes of Burkina Faso's leadership, preventing radicalization today may help avoid a far greater crisis tomorrow. The actions taken by Burkina Faso have not gone unnoticed outside Africa. International organizations, human rights groups, and several Western observers have raised concerns about the balance between security measures and individual freedoms. Their criticism highlights an important debate that extends far beyond the Imam Kindo case. One concern focuses on freedom of religion and freedom of expression. Critics argue that governments must be careful when responding to controversial religious messages. They warn that excessive intervention could create fears about restrictions on legitimate religious activity and public debate. Others question whether security policies risk concentrating too much power in the hands of the state. They emphasize the importance of transparency, legal safeguards, and independent institutions to ensure that measures taken in the name of security remain accountable. However, supporters of Burkina Faso's position present a different argument. They point out that the country is confronting an active terrorist threat and cannot afford to ignore warning signs. From their perspective, preventing radicalization before it evolves into violence is a responsibility rather than an option. This disagreement reflects a broader global challenge. Where should societies draw the line between protecting freedom and protecting security? At what point does a dangerous narrative become a national threat? There are no simple answers, yet the debate itself demonstrates why the Imam Kindo controversy has attracted so much attention. It is not only about one individual or one country. It is about how modern societies respond to the risk of extremism while preserving the freedoms they seek to defend. The controversy surrounding Imam Kindo is ultimately about more than one preacher, one government decision, or one moment in Burkina Faso's history. It reflects a larger question that many African nations continue to face. How can countries protect freedom while also protecting themselves from the long-term dangers of extremism? The experiences of Mali and Nigeria demonstrate that violent movements often begin with ideas long before they appear with weapons. For Burkina Faso, this lesson has become central to its security strategy under Captain Ibrahim Traore. Whether supporters agree with every decision or not, the government's message is clear. Preventing radicalization is easier than fighting a full-scale insurgency. As Africa continues to confront these challenges, debates about security, sovereignty, and national unity will remain at the center of public life. The future of a stronger Pan-African vision may depend on how countries balance these competing priorities. Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traore, Pan-Africanism, the African Union, and the broader Africa New movement will all play important roles in shaping that conversation. If you enjoyed this analysis, follow the channel for more in-depth coverage of Africa's most important stories. Across many parts of the world today, governments are struggling to contain rising street violence, online extremism, and the growing chaos spreading through social media. But in Burkina Faso, something very different is happening. Under the leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traore, the country is moving toward a new security model that combines technology, citizen participation, and aggressive control of digital threats. In recent months, authorities in Ouagadougou announced that more than 50 individuals are being hunted for spreading violent and hateful content online. At the same time, the government launched Alerte Labal, a mobile application that allows ordinary citizens to report acts of incivility, suspicious behavior, and threats directly from their phones using voice recordings, photos, and GPS location Supporters say Burkina Faso is finally restoring order after years of instability and fear. Critics warn that the country may be entering an era of dangerous digital surveillance. But one thing is clear: Ibrahim Traore's government no longer sees social media as harmless entertainment. It now treats information itself as a battlefield. Before Traore rose to power, Burkina Faso was facing one of the darkest periods in its modern history. Terrorist attacks were spreading across the Sahel region. Entire communities were displaced. Fear dominated daily life, and many citizens believed the state was losing control of both the streets and the national conversation online. If you want more deep analysis about Africa's changing political future and the rise of new security systems across the continent, make sure you subscribe and follow this channel. As violence expanded across the Sahel, many people inside Burkina Faso began to feel abandoned by the political system that existed before Ibrahim Traore. Villages were attacked repeatedly, military convoys were ambushed, schools closed in several regions, and millions of citizens lived under constant uncertainty. For many families, daily survival became more important than politics. At the same time, another crisis was spreading quietly through smartphones and social media platforms. False rumors, manipulated videos, ethnic hatred, and calls for violence were circulating rapidly on Facebook, TikTok, and WhatsApp. In some cases, online messages created panic faster than events happening on the ground. Citizens no longer knew which information could be trusted. Security analysts across West Africa began describing the situation as a double crisis. Burkina Faso was not only fighting armed extremists in remote areas, it was also fighting an invisible war of information inside the minds of its own population. This environment helped explain why Ibrahim Traore quickly gained support among many young Africans after taking power. Unlike previous leaders, he presented himself as a wartime figure, ready to restore order with firmness and speed. He spoke constantly about discipline, sovereignty, and national unity. To his supporters, Traore represented a leader who understood that modern wars are no longer fought only with weapons. They are also fought through fear, propaganda, and psychological pressure spread online. For many citizens exhausted by years of instability, the arrival of Traore created a feeling that the state was finally prepared to act decisively instead of simply reacting to chaos after it exploded. Under Ibrahim Traore, Burkina Faso has started treating digital space as a front line of national security. The government no longer believes that online chaos stays online. Officials argue that a single message on social media can trigger fear, riots, ethnic tension, or even deadly violence in real life. This explains why authorities recently intensified operations against individuals accused of spreading hateful and violent content across Facebook, TikTok, and WhatsApp. The announcement that more than 50 suspects are currently being hunted marked a major shift in Burkina Faso's security policy. The message from Ouagadougou was direct. The internet would no longer remain a lawless territory. For Traore's administration, this campaign is not only about punishment, it is also about deterrence. Some individuals have already received prison sentences, while others were ordered to perform public service work or pay financial penalties. Officials believe these actions will discourage online extremism before it spreads further into society. At the center of this strategy is the idea of total security. In the past, governments focused mainly on borders, weapons, and military operations. But Burkina Faso now views psychological stability and information control as equally important. Leaders fear that fake news and online manipulation can weaken national unity faster than armed attacks. Supporters of Ibrahim Traore say this approach reflects the reality of modern conflict in Africa. According to them, Terrorist groups and hostile networks increasingly use social media to spread panic and division. In their eyes, controlling dangerous online content is no longer censorship. It is national defense. For many ordinary citizens, the aggressive response from the government created the impression that the state was finally taking back control of both the streets and the digital world. One of the most important symbols of Burkina Faso's new security strategy is the launch of the mobile application known as Alerte Label. More than just a reporting tool, the application represents a new philosophy of governance where ordinary citizens become active participants in protecting national stability. The application allows users to report acts of incivility, suspicious activities, or threats directly from their phones. Citizens can type descriptions, record voice messages, attach photographs, and share GPS locations in real time. Instead of traveling to a police station, a person can instantly alert authorities from almost anywhere in the country. For the government, this system creates faster communication between society and security services. Officials believe rapid reporting can help prevent violence before situations spiral out of control. In a country facing both terrorism and online instability, speed has become a critical weapon. The Brigade Label unit, which oversees the platform, presents the application as a tool for discipline, order, and civic responsibility. Authorities repeatedly emphasize that national security is no longer only the responsibility of soldiers and police officers. Citizens themselves must become part of the defensive structure of the country. Supporters see Alerte Label as proof that Burkina Faso is modernizing its security system in a uniquely African way. Instead of relying entirely on expensive foreign technologies, the country is using smartphones already present in the hands of millions of people. However, critics warn that systems based on public reporting can create risks if they are abused. False accusations, personal revenge, or excessive surveillance could damage trust within society. Because of this, the long-term success of the platform may depend not only on technology, but also on transparency and public confidence in the state. Across Africa today, governments are increasingly worried about a new kind of battlefield that cannot be seen with tanks or fighter jets. It exists inside smartphones, social media feeds, and messaging applications used every day by millions of people. Burkina Faso believes this invisible battlefield may be just as dangerous as armed conflict itself. In recent years, fake news, manipulated videos, and extremist propaganda have spread rapidly across West Africa. Platforms such as TikTok, Facebook, and WhatsApp are often used to inflame ethnic tensions, encourage violence, and create fear during moments of political instability. Security experts warn that online panic can now spread faster than official information from the government. For Burkina Faso, this threat became especially serious because the country was already fighting terrorist groups across the Sahel region. Authorities feared that social media chaos could weaken public morale, divide communities, and make the work of extremists even easier. In this environment, information itself became a weapon. Supporters of Ibrahim Traore argue that this is why the government decided to aggressively monitor and punish dangerous online activity. In their view, a nation cannot survive modern conflict while allowing digital platforms to become tools for manipulation and destabilization. Critics respond that controlling online speech can create another danger by limiting free expression and encouraging fear among ordinary citizens. But many people inside Burkina Faso believe the country no longer has the luxury of ignoring digital threats while violence continues around them. For Traore's supporters, protecting the information space is not separate from protecting the nation. It is now considered part of the same war for survival. As Burkina Faso expands its digital security system, criticism from Western governments and international organizations has also grown stronger. Human rights groups argue that aggressive monitoring of social media and the arrest of online users could threaten freedom of expression and create a culture of fear inside society. Some critics believe applications such as Alerte Laabal resemble systems of digital surveillance where citizens are encouraged to report one another. According to these concerns, governments may eventually use national security as a justification to silence criticism or monitor political opponents. Others warn that ordinary people could begin censoring themselves online out of fear of punishment. Western media outlets have also questioned whether Burkina Faso is moving toward a heavily militarized society where security becomes more important than open public debate. To many observers in Europe and North America, the rapid expansion of state control over digital space raises serious concerns about privacy and civil liberties. But supporters of Ibrahim Traore strongly reject these criticisms. They argue that many Western countries apply similar measures when facing terrorism or violent extremism. European governments regularly pressure social media companies to remove extremist content, while the United States invests heavily in digital surveillance related to national security. For many people in Burkina Faso, the difference is simple. Western countries criticize internet control from a position of stability, while Burkina Faso is fighting for survival in the middle of an active security crisis. Supporters believe the nation cannot afford unlimited online chaos, while armed violence and extremist propaganda continue spreading across the region. This debate ultimately raises a difficult question for modern Africa. Where should the line be drawn between protecting freedom and protecting national survival? The answer may shape the future of digital governance across the continent for many years to come. Burkina Faso is now becoming one of the most closely watched political experiments in modern Africa. While many nations continue struggling with insecurity, online extremism, and social fragmentation, Ibrahim Traore's government is attempting to build a completely different model based on discipline, technology, and citizen participation. Unlike traditional security systems that depend only on police forces and military patrols, Burkina Faso is creating a structure where ordinary people are expected to play an active role in protecting national stability. Through applications such as Alerte Laabal and the aggressive campaign against online incitement, the country is sending a powerful message that information itself has become part of national defense. Some African observers believe this could become a new model for the continent. Rwanda strengthened public order through discipline and centralized governance. Mali and Niger intensified military responses against insecurity. But Burkina Faso appears to be combining digital monitoring, civic responsibility, and Pan-African political identity into a single strategy. This transformation has also increased Ibrahim Traore's popularity among many young Africans who see him as a symbol of sovereignty and resistance against foreign pressure. Across social media platforms, supporters describe him as part of an African new generation of leadership that prioritizes national survival over international approval. Still, the future remains uncertain. A system built around security can strengthen a nation, but it can also create fear if power becomes too concentrated. The real challenge for Burkina Faso will be maintaining trust between the state and its people, while continuing to fight terrorism and information warfare at the same time. Whether admired or criticized, Captain Ibrahim Traore has already changed the political conversation across the continent. From Burkina Faso to the wider African Union, debates about digital sovereignty, Pan-Africanism, and the future of African security are growing louder every day. If you want to continue following the rise of Ibrahim Traore and the changing future of Pan-African politics, make sure you subscribe and stay connected with this channel. When Somalia's Interior Security Minister arrived in Ouagadougou to meet Captain Ibrahim Traore, many people outside Africa saw it as just another diplomatic visit. But across the continent, the message felt much bigger. A nation that has spent years fighting terrorism was now looking toward Burkina Faso for answers. That alone surprised many observers. For decades, African countries facing insurgencies usually turned first to France, the United States, or international military coalitions. Yet today, some leaders are beginning to look toward another African nation instead, a country once described only through poverty, instability, and violence is suddenly being discussed as a possible model of resistance and security cooperation. Why? Why would Somalia, a nation that has battled al-Shabaab for years, seek closer security ties with Burkina Faso? The answer may reveal a major shift happening inside Africa itself. Under Ibrahim Traore, Burkina Faso is trying to build something different. Not simply another military campaign against terrorism, but a broader vision based on self-reliance, national dignity, and African-led security cooperation. Supporters believe he is helping Africa rediscover confidence in its own strength after decades of dependency on outside powers. And that is exactly why this story matters far beyond Burkina Faso. Because the real question is no longer whether terrorism exists in Africa. The real question is who Africans now trust to fight it. If you enjoy deep stories about Africa's changing future, remember to subscribe because this channel follows the leaders, movements, and turning points reshaping the continent today. Somalia's visit to Burkina Faso was not symbolic theater. It reflected a growing belief that Ouagadougou may now represent something many African nations have been searching for: a homegrown response to insecurity. The visit from Somalia also carried another message that many international observers immediately understood. Burkina Faso was no longer being treated only as a country in crisis. It was beginning to be viewed as a security partner. Somalia and Burkina Faso share painful similarities. Both nations have spent years fighting extremist groups that attack villages, destroy schools, displace families, and weaken local economies. In both countries, terrorism has become more than a military issue. It has become part of everyday life. For ordinary citizens, the consequences are devastating. Farmers abandon their fields because armed groups control rural roads. Parents fear sending children to school. Entire communities are forced to flee with almost nothing. In many areas, survival itself becomes uncertain. That is why the meeting between Somali officials and Ibrahim Traore mattered so much. Somalia was not simply looking for diplomatic friendship, it was looking for practical cooperation in intelligence sharing, security training, and counterterrorism coordination. And perhaps most importantly, Somalia was looking at a country trying to fight back without depending entirely on foreign military structures. This growing interest in Burkina Faso also reflects frustration across parts of Africa. For years, Western powers promised stability in the Sahel through military operations, foreign bases, and counterterrorism missions. Yet, violence continued spreading across borders. Many Africans began asking difficult questions. If thousands of foreign troops, advanced technology, and international funding could not stop the crisis after so many years, then what exactly needed to change? That question would eventually help transform Ibrahim Traore from a national military leader into a continental political symbol. Across the Sahel, frustration toward Western military strategy did not appear overnight. France maintained a military presence in parts of West Africa for years. The United States also invested heavily in intelligence operations, surveillance programs, and counterterrorism support across the region. But despite all of this, insecurity often became worse instead of better. Armed groups expanded into rural territories. Attacks spread across borders. Millions of civilians were displaced. In some communities, people began feeling that foreign intervention had become permanent, while peace remained temporary. This growing anger fueled massive anti-French demonstrations in countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Protesters waved national flags and demanded greater sovereignty over security decisions. Many no longer wanted outside powers deciding the future of African nations. Still, the situation is more complicated than simple slogans. Not every failure can be blamed on Western countries alone. The Sahel crisis is also connected to poverty, corruption, weak state institutions, ethnic tensions, illegal arms trafficking, and decades of political instability. Even the strongest military operation struggles when these deeper problems remain unresolved. That is why Ibrahim Traore's message resonates with many Africans. He argues that security cannot depend only on foreign soldiers or military equipment. A nation must rebuild confidence inside its own population. Citizens must believe they are defending their own homeland, not serving outside interests. For supporters, this is what makes Burkina Faso different. The country is attempting to reconnect national security with national identity itself. And for many Africans watching from outside Burkina Faso, that idea feels more powerful than any foreign speech about stabilization. Instead of waiting for outside armies to solve the crisis, Ibrahim Traore began promoting a different strategy. His government focused on building local resistance networks, strengthening cooperation with neighboring Sahel states, and involving ordinary citizens in national defense. One of the most important parts of this strategy was the Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland program. Thousands of civilians received training to help protect villages and support national security forces. Supporters viewed the program as proof that Burkina Faso was trying to transform the entire population into a force capable of resisting terrorism. To many citizens, this approach restored something they felt had been disappearing for years: national pride. Traore also pushed for stronger regional alliances. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger created the Alliance of Sahel States, often called AES. Together, these countries began discussing intelligence sharing, joint military coordination, and a collective response to extremist violence spreading across the region. This was not just military cooperation, it was also political symbolism. For decades, many African security systems relied heavily on outside funding, foreign military advisors, and international operations. AES represented an attempt to build an African-centered security structure controlled primarily by African governments themselves. Traore repeatedly argued that terrorism cannot be defeated by weapons alone. According to his vision, security must also include food production, economic independence, and stronger local communities. A hungry and desperate population is easier for extremist groups to exploit. That message connected deeply with many ordinary Africans. For them, the fight against terrorism is not only about soldiers on battlefields, it is also about whether families can farm safely, children can attend school, and entire communities can live without fear again. As Ibrahim Traore's influence grew, many Africans began comparing him to Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary leader who once transformed Burkina Faso into a symbol of African dignity and self-reliance. The comparison is emotional more than political, but it reveals how strongly Traore's image resonates across the continent. He is young, direct, and openly speaks about sovereignty, national pride, and resistance to dependency. In an era when many African citizens feel disappointed by traditional political elites, Traore appears different. To supporters, He looks like a leader, willing to confront pressures that others avoided for decades. This explains why his speeches spread rapidly across African social media platforms. Many young Africans see him as part of a new Pan-African generation. A generation that believes Africa should control its own resources, secure its own borders, and define its own political future without constant outside direction. Still, admiration alone does not solve Burkina Faso's problems. The country continues facing deadly attacks, humanitarian crises, and economic hardship. Large parts of the population remain vulnerable, and security challenges are far from over. Critics argue that strong rhetoric and military mobilization may not guarantee long-term stability. But even critics admit something important. Traore has changed the conversation. Before, many African nations were discussed mainly as victims waiting for foreign intervention. Now, Burkina Faso is attempting to present itself differently, not as a helpless state, but as a country trying to organize its own survival on its own terms. That shift may explain why some Western governments view the growing popularity of Ibrahim Traore with concern. Because if more African nations begin embracing this model of political and security independence, the balance of influence across the continent could change dramatically. Western criticism toward Burkina Faso often focuses on democracy, military governance, and human rights concerns. Some international observers argue that relying too heavily on military structures could weaken civilian institutions over time. Others worry that anti-Western sentiment may isolate countries like Burkina Faso from global partnerships and financial support. These concerns are real and cannot simply be ignored. But supporters of Ibrahim Traore answer with a different question. What should a country do when decades of foreign-backed security strategies fail to stop terrorism? For many citizens in the Sahel, this debate is no longer theoretical. It is personal. Entire generations have grown up surrounded by violence, instability, and uncertainty. In their eyes, waiting for the same solutions to suddenly produce different results no longer makes sense. This is why Traore's message continues spreading beyond Burkina Faso. He represents the belief that African nations should at least have the right to attempt their own path, even if that path carries risks and challenges. To many supporters, sovereignty means little if security decisions are still shaped mostly outside the continent. Somalia's outreach to Burkina Faso may therefore represent something much larger than bilateral cooperation. It may signal the beginning of a broader shift toward African-led security partnerships built on shared experience rather than external supervision. For other African countries, the lesson is becoming harder to ignore. No nation can protect itself permanently if its people feel disconnected from the state, dependent on outside protection, or excluded from national purpose. Security is not only about weapons, it is also about identity, trust, dignity, and belief in a shared future. Somalia's decision to turn toward Burkina Faso may one day be remembered as more than a diplomatic event. It may represent a moment when parts of Africa quietly began changing the direction of their future. Burkina Faso has not defeated terrorism. The country still faces painful losses, dangerous attacks, and enormous economic pressure. But what makes Captain Ibrahim Traore impossible to ignore is not the claim of total victory. It is the determination to pursue a different vision while under pressure from every direction. For many Africans, that determination carries emotional weight. A small nation once viewed mainly through the lens of crisis is now trying to inspire a broader continental movement based on sovereignty, resilience, and cooperation between African states themselves. Somalia's outreach to Ouagadougou reflects growing recognition that African nations may need to rely more on each other in the years ahead. That idea is becoming central to a new wave of Pan-African thinking. In this Africa new generation, security is no longer seen only as a matter of foreign alliances or military hardware. It is tied to dignity, identity, economic survival, and the belief that African people deserve control over their own destiny. Whether people support or criticize Ibrahim Traore, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. He has already changed the conversation inside Africa. Today, Burkina Faso stands at the center of debates about sovereignty, resistance, and the future role of the African Union in protecting the continent from instability and foreign dependency. And for many supporters of Pan-Africanism, Captain Ibrahim Traore has become a symbol of a continent searching for confidence in itself again. Do you believe Ibrahim Traore's model could inspire other African nations? Or will Burkina Faso face the same struggles that challenged previous movements for independence and self-reliance? Share your thoughts below. And subscribe for more deep stories about Africa, Burkina Faso, and the leaders shaping the continent's future. What if the greatest weapon against terrorism is not a rifle, a drone, or a military convoy? What if the most powerful defense of a nation begins inside a home, in the mind of a child, guided by the wisdom of a mother? This is the question that Burkina Faso is forcing many people across Africa to consider today. For years, Burkina Faso has faced one of the most difficult security crises on the African continent. Armed groups have attacked villages, displaced families, and disrupted the lives of millions. Like many countries facing such threats, the immediate response has often focused on military operations and security measures. Yet Ibrahim Traore and his supporters increasingly speak about something deeper. They argue that a nation cannot permanently defeat violence if it ignores the social conditions that allow violence to grow. According to this vision, the future of Burkina Faso will not be decided only by soldiers on the battlefield. It will also be decided by parents in their homes, teachers in classrooms, and especially mothers raising the next generation. The idea is simple but powerful. A child who grows up with education, discipline, hope, and a strong sense of identity is less likely to be attracted by extremist ideologies later in life. If you enjoy exploring the hidden forces shaping Africa's future, be sure to follow this channel and join us on this journey. History has shown that military victories alone do not always create lasting peace. Countries across different regions have defeated armed groups only to see new ones emerge years later. The reason is often the same. The weapons may disappear, but the poverty, hopelessness, and social instability that helped create the conflict remain. Burkina Faso is increasingly promoting the belief that true victory comes when society itself becomes stronger than the forces trying to divide it. A child may spend a few hours each day with teachers, neighbors, or friends, but for many years of life, no influence is stronger than that of a mother. Before a child learns about politics, religion, or society, that child learns values at home. The first lessons about responsibility, respect, discipline, and hard work often come from the person who raises them every day. This is why many experts believe that mothers are among the most important builders of national stability. When a mother has access to education, she is more likely to encourage her children to stay in school. When she has economic opportunities, she can help provide a more secure future for her family. When she understands the importance of critical thinking and community values, she becomes a powerful barrier against extremist influences. Across many regions affected by conflict, researchers have observed a similar pattern. Young people who feel abandoned, hopeless, or disconnected from society are often more vulnerable to recruitment by violent groups. These organizations frequently exploit frustration and poverty, offering a false sense of purpose and belonging. But when a child grows up in a stable home with guidance, support, and hope, the appeal of such messages becomes much weaker. For supporters of Burkina Faso's current direction, this reality carries an important lesson. The battle against terrorism does not begin when a soldier enters combat. It begins years earlier, when a child is learning what kind of person he or she will become. A nation that invests in mothers is investing in the character of its future citizens. This perspective does not place the entire responsibility on women. Fathers, schools, religious leaders, and communities all play important roles. However, the mother often remains the central figure during the most formative years of life. If Burkina Faso wants to build a generation capable of rejecting violence and embracing progress, many believe that empowering mothers is one of the smartest investments the country can make. If military operations represent the visible side of Burkina Faso's struggle for stability, cultural identity represents the less visible side. This is where many observers believe Ibrahim Traore is trying to build a foundation that will last beyond the current security crisis. Supporters of the government often argue that a nation cannot remain strong if its people lose confidence in their own values, traditions, and identity. In their view, national development is not only about roads, factories, or military equipment. It is also about creating citizens who understand who they are and what kind of future they want to build. This perspective helps explain why cultural issues sometimes receive significant attention in public debates. One example was the decision by authorities to prohibit the planned Miss Emerge 2025 event. According to official statements, the activity was considered inconsistent with the moral, social, and cultural values that the government seeks to promote. The decision generated discussion both inside and outside Burkina Faso. Supporters saw the move as part of a broader effort to encourage priorities such as education, professional development, social responsibility, and cultural pride. Critics viewed it differently, arguing that personal freedom should play a larger role in determining social activities, regardless of where one stands in that debate. The decision revealed an important aspect of the government's vision. The larger objective appears to be the creation of a society that is confident in its own identity, rather than one that simply imitates outside models. For Ibrahim Traore and many of his supporters, cultural sovereignty is closely connected to political and economic sovereignty. They believe that a population with strong roots and a clear sense of purpose is better prepared to resist division, manipulation, and instability. In that sense, the discussion is not only about a beauty competition, it is about the kind of citizens Burkina Faso hopes to raise and the values that future generations will inherit. Burkina Faso is not the first country to discover the importance of women in national development. Around the world, several nations have demonstrated that empowering women can strengthen families, improve education, reduce poverty, and create more stable societies. One of the most frequently cited examples is Rwanda. After the devastating genocide of 1994, the country faced the enormous challenge of rebuilding trust, institutions, and communities. Rwanda did not focus exclusively on security measures. It also increased opportunities for women to participate in politics, education, and economic development. Over time, women became central contributors to national reconstruction, helping create one of Africa's most stable and organized societies. Ghana offers another important lesson. While no country is free from challenges, Ghana has long been recognized as one of the more stable democracies in West Africa. Increased access to education for girls and greater participation of women in economic life have contributed to stronger communities and improved social resilience. When families become more economically secure, Extremist groups often find it harder to recruit frustrated young people. Examples can also be found outside Africa. In Bangladesh, programs supporting women's education and entrepreneurship helped millions of families improve their living conditions. In Indonesia, community-based education initiatives involving mothers and local leaders have played a role in reducing the influence of extremist narratives in certain regions. These experiences share a common lesson. Long-term stability is not created solely by military victories. It is built through families, schools, and communities. Every child who remains in school, instead of dropping out, represents a small victory. Every mother who gains the skills to support her family contributes to national resilience. For supporters of Burkina Faso's current approach, these international examples reinforce a simple belief. Investing in women is not only a social policy, it is also an investment in security, stability, and the future strength of the nation. As Burkina Faso pursues its own path, not everyone agrees with the direction being taken. Some international observers, media organizations, and political commentators have criticized aspects of the government's approach, particularly when cultural policies become part of national development strategies. One common criticism is that restrictions on certain activities may reduce individual freedom. Critics argue that citizens should have broad authority to make personal choices about entertainment, fashion, and cultural participation. From this perspective, government involvement in cultural matters can appear excessive or unnecessary. However, supporters of Burkina Faso's approach respond with a different argument. They believe that every nation has the right to define the values it considers important for its future. Just as countries protect their borders and economic interests, they also have the right to protect cultural priorities that reflect their history and social realities. Another criticism suggests that cultural policies have little connection to security challenges. Opponents argue that terrorism is primarily a military problem requiring military solutions, yet supporters counter that this view overlooks the deeper causes of instability. Armed groups do not recruit people from a vacuum. They often target communities struggling with poverty, social fragmentation, weak education, and limited opportunities. From this perspective, strengthening families and promoting positive social values are not alternatives to security operations. They are complementary strategies. Soldiers may stop an attack today, but strong communities can help prevent future generations from being drawn into violence. Many people in Burkina Faso also reject the idea that foreign observers should determine the country's development priorities. They argue that African nations should be free to experiment with solutions rooted in their own cultures and experiences. Whether one agrees or disagrees with the government's methods, an important debate is taking place. The discussion is no longer only about how to defeat terrorists on the battlefield, it is also about how to build a society where terrorism finds fewer opportunities to grow in the first place. To understand why many supporters view Ibrahim Traore differently from traditional political leaders, it is important to look beyond current events and examine the broader vision that surrounds his leadership. For many Burkinabe citizens, the fight against terrorism is only one chapter in a much larger national transformation. Traore frequently speaks about sovereignty, self-reliance, production, education, and national dignity. His supporters argue that these ideas are connected. A country cannot be truly secure if it depends entirely on others for its economy. It cannot be truly independent if it loses confidence in its culture. And it cannot guarantee its future if its young people grow up without purpose or opportunity. This thinking has led many observers to compare elements of Traore's message with the legacy of Thomas Sankara. One of Burkina Faso's most respected historical figures, Sankara believed that national development required active participation from all citizens, including women. He viewed education, productive work, and social responsibility as essential pillars of a strong nation. Within this framework, mothers occupy a special place. Soldiers can defend territory, governments can build infrastructure, businesses can create jobs. But mothers help shape the attitudes, values, and ambitions of the next generation. That is why many supporters see family development as a strategic investment rather than merely a social issue. The broader vision, often described as the popular progressive revolution, seeks to connect security, culture, education, and economic development into a single national project. Instead of treating these issues separately, the goal is to strengthen each one at the same time. A safer country supports better education. Better education supports economic growth. Economic growth strengthens families. Strong families help create stable communities. For supporters of Ibrahim Traore, this is the real objective. The ultimate victory will not simply be measured by territory recovered from armed groups. It will be measured by the emergence of a new generation that is educated, confident, productive, and committed to building a stronger Burkina Faso for decades to come. The story of Burkina Faso raises a question that extends far beyond one country. What truly creates lasting security? Is it only military strength, or is it also the strength of families, communities, and the values passed from one generation to the next? The argument emerging from many supporters of Ibrahim Traore is clear. Terrorism is not defeated only when armed groups lose territory. It is defeated when young people gain opportunities, when families become stronger, and when communities provide hope instead of despair. In this vision, mothers become far more than caregivers. They become guardians of the future. A well-educated mother can influence an entire family. A family built on stability and purpose can influence a community. When millions of families move in the same direction, they can transform a nation. This is why many observers believe that investments in education, women, and cultural identity should be viewed not only as social policies, but also as long-term security strategies. Burkina Faso's experience also offers a broader lesson for Africa. Every nation facing insecurity must eventually answer the same question. How do you prevent the next generation from becoming vulnerable to violence? Military operations may address immediate threats, but education, opportunity, and family development help address the deeper causes. Whether one agrees with every policy or not, the larger debate remains important. It challenges governments to think beyond short-term victories and focus on building societies capable of sustaining peace for decades. For many supporters of Pan-African ideals, this discussion reflects a larger movement taking shape across the continent. They see Burkina Faso and Captain Ibrahim Traore as symbols of an Africa New movement that seeks greater self-confidence and self-determination. They believe that Pan-Africanism, regional cooperation through the African Union, and stronger national institutions can help create a more secure future. In their eyes, Ibrahim Traore represents not only a political leader, but also a reminder that lasting change begins with people, families, and communities. If Africa hopes to build a stronger tomorrow, the journey may indeed begin with the mothers who shape the citizens of the future. If you found this perspective valuable, share your thoughts below and follow the channel for more discussions about Burkina Faso, Pan-African development, and the ideas shaping Africa's future. Have you noticed something unusual about the case of Imam Mohammed Isaac Kindo? Across Burkina Faso, discussions continue to grow around the influential Sunni preacher. Yet, one question keeps attracting attention. If the authorities intended to impose a severe punishment, Why has there been no final public announcement explaining exactly what will happen next? This question has encouraged many observers to look beyond the headlines. Some believe the government is sending a message about national unity. Others believe the situation may eventually lead to a more conciliatory outcome. In this video, we will examine the facts surrounding the case, the reactions it has generated, and the signs that have led some people to wonder whether Imam Kindo could regain his freedom in the future. We will also explore the role of President Ibrahim Traore, the importance of social cohesion, and why this issue has become a national conversation rather than simply a legal matter. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel and join our growing community for more analysis on Burkina Faso and the major developments shaping Africa today. To understand the current debate, we must first look at what happened. Imam Mohammed Isaac Kindo is one of the best-known Sunni religious figures in Burkina Faso. His sermons have reached large audiences, giving him significant influence within parts of the Muslim community. The controversy began after a series of statements connected to religious coexistence and national unity. Critics argued that some of his